Welcome back to day 200 of quarantine. And get your Corona bingo cards ready, folks, because exciting news out of our sister states in the Midwest. Yes, the brave freedom fighters in Michigan have finally prevailed. The doctors and the immunocompromised were vanquished when every middle-aged white woman marched to the nearest Baskin and Robbins in solidarity to the thought of harassing minimum wage workers. These brave souls on the front lines have defected from the lockdown created by the Chinese Communist Party's virus, chanting, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down mandatory social distancing. The president has further shown his support, calling for Texas and Minnesota to liberate themselves. And listeners, you know that we here on the War Room are violent anarcho-capitalist revolutionaries that completely endorse this message. So folks, if your state has forced you into unjust lockdown because of a flu, liberate yourselves. Grab your essential oils, drop the Democrat propagandist in 64 mask, and go to church. See your Facebook friends and embrace them only by their faces. Go to your local hometown buffet and double dip everything. Liberate yourself, America. We have nothing to lose but our chance.
FM radio. Well, welcome back to Cheney's War Room, which most Republicans agree should not be legal 4 weeks after conception.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Alright, welcome back to the 4th episode of Cheney's War Room. I hope your quarantine is going very well. It's not for us. I personally spend 10 hours a day playing Red Dead 2, 12 hours reading PDFs from international relations scholars during the Nixon administration, and the final 2 hours trying to sleep. Nathan, how about you? How's your quarantine going?
Well, in addition to balding, I'm growing a really long gray beard right now, so that's what I'm up to.
Well, if that's all out of the way, it's been a slow news week, honestly, but we still want to cover some stuff. So I guess let's just get into it. This will probably be a shorter episode, but we still want to touch on some things that we view as important. Nathan, you want to start us off?
Sure. Joe Biden.
Oh,
Okay,
shit.
so this week Joe Biden received a lot of endorsements after Bernie has dropped out. Most of these are pretty predictable, in line with the party. Barack Obama, who had distanced himself from the primary race to create fair competition, but expressed pretty openly that he didn't want the Democratic Party moving too far left, and also with aides or somebody who quoted him, even though he didn't say it publicly, thought that maybe Bernie would split the party too much. He's endorsed Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders, who dropped out, and before he dropped out promised that if he dropped out he would endorse Joe Biden, has endorsed Joe Biden. And Elizabeth Warren, who waited for a super long time, finally endorsed after Bernie. Now, this is really interesting. I think it brings up the question of, why did Elizabeth Warren wait so long? People were expecting her, I think, to endorse Bernie Sanders, obviously, because their policies were sort of in line. But Warren has been raised as a possibility for vice president after Biden promised to put a woman into that position. And so it's interesting that she waited until basically it was clear cut that he was the nominee to finally do that. Do you have anything to say about that in particular, Porter?
Not on that, I guess. I guess we saw all these endorsements coming. I guess for me, the Obama thing, like, I get if you want to say that he was, like, holding back and didn't want to, quote-unquote, influence the Democratic Party and the primary of how its process was supposed to go. I just found it funny that he waited until there was nobody else in the race to endorse his former vice president. That, at least to me, doesn't speak volumes to how much hope he has for Biden, but we'll see. We'll see, once again. Endorsements are a very weird thing. But I do actually have something else to add on Biden. This is an update to a previous episode I did, number 2, I believe, on Tara Reid. A update to the Tara Reid story. And I said back then that no mainstream media reports have come out about Tara Reid, specifically in the New York Times. But the New York Times has finally published a piece on it. However, their piece had a lot of issues. You probably heard about this if you read the piece or you heard about it because it traded on Twitter a few times. But once again, this is like 2.5 weeks after the initial allegation from Tara Reid. So it's already pretty horrible that it took the New York Times this long to cover it. But I do want to read, there's one point I want to bring up about the New York Times article on Tara Reid, is that they had a sentence in it that I found very saddening because no longer how long I try at this whole like comedy thing, I can never write a sentence as good as that. But they did change it, and once again, I think it speaks volumes to who Biden is a character. Here, I'll just read the sentence for you. The Times found no pattern of sexual misconduct by Mr. Biden beyond the hugs, kissing, and touching that made women previously said made them uncomfortable. And they changed that after a lot of pushback to, and I quote, the Times found no pattern of sexual misconduct by Mr. Biden. So, take of that what you will. I guess moving forward, if we want to talk about like what's the presumptive future of the whole Tara Reade situation and scandal, I don't think it's gonna go away per se. I think it's gonna go into hibernation. So my prediction right now is that the Tara Reade thing is gonna go into hibernation. It's probably not gonna come up in very serious spheres till the nomination. But once we get a few months into like the general election, it's going to be all over everywhere. Fox News is going to be running back-to-back reports on it, and Trump's going to be riffing about it at his rallies. That's what I see right now. That's my prediction. Maybe I'm wrong.
Right. I think it'll be really interesting to see what the Republican Party does. The Democratic Party and liberals and moderates have shown for a lot of them that they're willing to believe women until it's against a popular Democratic candidate for president. I'm interested to see Republicans who largely have ignored allegations by women in cases like Kavanaugh. I wonder if they will hop onto the Joe Biden allegations, or if they will continue to downplay women because that's kind of their MO, their ideology.
I think they're going to do both. I think they're going to continue. They're going to do attempt to be like, well, we can't in good faith have Biden as a president because he doesn't respect women. They're going to say that, but once again turn back around and vote for like Roy Moore Jr. or something. So it's going to be a two-faced attempt, but that's what I see right now. But we only time will tell.
Right. Moving on to the other issue at hand, Donald Trump has been flip-flopping for a couple weeks now about what his role is in the opening of the country. He started by saying he had a ton of authority, but then when he made the announcement that he was trying to open up the country, he said he would let states decide. Just maybe a day later, he went on a huge rant on Twitter in all caps, talking about liberating various states across the country that are currently under quarantine, conservative states. And in response, and in addition, we have seen a bunch of protests throughout the country by people who are angry that they are being kept under lockdown for their safety in places like Michigan, right?
Michigan. It was Michigan, Minnesota, and Texas, I believe, were the main ones. So Trump called for like liberate Minnesota on Twitter, and called for armed insurrection against the flu to own the libs. And then a bunch of people went out and like, actually I think the main protest was in Michigan, I believe, where a bunch of people rolled up in their jacked up 4x4s and just blocked entrances to a hospital and flew a few Confederate flags in Michigan for some reason, like the most northern Union state. I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah. There was a very interesting article written by NBC News about how extremists interpreted those Donald Trump tweets. Boogaloo, which is a term used by Canon.
Oh, the QAnon fools? Like those people
QAnon.
Yeah, QAnon.
Yeah. A term that talked about kind of the uprising. Posts about it skyrocketed after the president's tweets. So it really has served as a dog whistle for, I think, extremist militants, what Donald Trump has said, using wording like liberate.
I mean, we may see ourselves come to a full-on armed insurrection in a bit, but that would be interesting, and that's definitely not on my coronavirus bingo sheet. We also have, moving on from that, there is something that I want to talk about that I've been passionate about over the last couple of weeks that I haven't really brought up or like been able to talk about too much because it's been kind of weird that this has been pushed so much, and I don't really see it as like something that's substantial and very much two-faced. But that is Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo is currently the acting governor of the state of New York. You may have seen his in the news recently because he's been all over. He was on the Times cover, I believe, a few weeks ago, and Cuomo-sexual trended on Twitter for a bit. But the main point you have to understand, as the good liberal that you are, is that Andrew Cuomo is the savior of coronavirus because he's been on every single media owning Trump and doing other great things. And he should be the one that replaces Biden, if the DNC is going to replace Biden. But I want to try and counteract that and hit the media narrative that Andrew Cuomo really isn't a very good person, and he really doesn't deserve the praise that he's getting. So, and why is he being painted as a saint here? Because America's always had a weird obsession with the governor and mayor of New York, even now, especially with coronavirus, because he's like supposed to be seen as like the opposite to Trump's response, which I guess you could say, but that doesn't mean Andrew Cuomo's response is then, in contrast, any good. To begin, what we know about New York right now. New York has the most cases, or the state of New York has the most cases in all of the U.S., and I believe their death count has rivaled some other countries like Italy and China's official numbers, but I'm not 100% certain on that, so don't quote me on that. But the main thing, they have a lot of confirmed coronavirus cases, hundreds, if not thousands of deaths, and there are still mass graves being dug out on Hart Island to accommodate all of them. Andrew Cuomo has not done a good job to stop this, and moreover, he got us into this situation where we are now in New York that has led to so many deaths and such a horrible reaction to all of it. Before all this started, Andrew Cuomo made a big deal in his budget of the New York State of cutting Medicare, and his new budget also called for cutting from hospitals and other healthcare services across the state. So what this meant was going into the coronavirus outbreak, the citizens of New York State had the Medicare cut, and Cuomo's new budget also called for $38 million a year to be cut from Central Brooklyn hospitals, but that's okay because that's where all the poors live. Furthermore, Cuomo's also cut like hospital beds before all this happened. So over the last 20 years in New York, they have lost roughly like 20,000 hospital beds, and they currently need, the estimate is like 110,000. So he got us into this situation where New York is right now. And every single attempt that he's doing right now to look like on media that he's trying to be the savior to fix New York and he's out here trying to help people is completely two-faced. It's completely hypocritical. He got them there. Sure, if he didn't do the things he did before, New York wouldn't be completely okay right now, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be better. And that doesn't mean they wouldn't have had a better response to all of this. Another thing is, once again, we loop back to Bernie Sanders because we always do. He was also very against Bernie Sanders. And one of the main things was he was, for a long time in the primary, against withholding the Democratic primary in New York State. And he was against mail-in ballots. And mail-in ballots are good. They work so much better than everything else, but he was against them. He was talked about like fraud and whatnot and all the different, like the typical talking points against mail-in ballots. But then the day Bernie Sanders dropped out and it was just Joe Biden, he was like, okay, yeah, sure. And then the state switched to mail-in ballots. I see this as just him completely okay with holding his entire state hostage to the idea of not having mail-in ballots to make it lead to conceivably more deaths to get Biden more votes inside the state. Andrew Cuomo should not be seen as the saint in all of this. At the end of this, he should be seen as the governor that in the face of coronavirus, his own citizens dying, he tried to cut their health care. But maybe he is the liberal savior. I don't know. Tweet at me if you're a homosexual. No, don't do that. I'll block you. Thank you all for listening to the 4th episode of Cheney's War Room. I hope you all are healthy. Please stay inside and just play video games. As for plugs, once again, you can find me on Instagram at Porter Wheeler. You can find me on Twitter as just Porter Wheeler or at Doc Dynington. Speaking of Twitter, I also want to give a huge shout out to the person who hacked my Twitter this week to advertise fake Ray-Ban for 90% off. That was really cool.
And I'm Nathan Wilk. You can find my podcast, Faces with Nathan Wilk, on YouTube or SoundCloud. Next week, we're going to become the new White House press secretary in a horse costume. And I hope I'm the ass.